Add strings. In this problem, we're given two non-negative integers, num1 and num2, represented as string, and we need to return the sum of num1 and num2 as a string. Now, what makes this problem a little difficult is the fact that we must solve the problem without using any built-in library for handling large integers, such as big integers, and you must also not convert the inputs to integers directly. So in other words, we cannot use integer.toString and then input the... So in other words, we can't use any functions like integer.parseInt or the classes like big integer or long, but rather we have to tackle the num1 and num2 strings as they are. And the way we're going to work around this is by dissecting num1 and num2 into characters, and then we're going to use ASCII values to solve the problem. Let's go a little more in depth about what that means. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the 1 and the 3 together and alone. Since they're strings, or more accurately characters, each character in Java has its own ASCII values. Now typically we'd use ASCII values for letters like A to Z. Lowercase a has its own, or the lowercase letters have their own ASCII values, and the uppercase letters have their own ASCII values, but numbers also have their own ASCII values. And what ASCII values are basically a numerical representation for characters. Now 0 in Java has an ASCII value of 48, 1 has an ASCII value of 49, and this keeps going up until 9. That's the last number with an ASCII value. And obviously you can't have ASCII values for 10, 11, and so on. You just combine the ASCII values of the other numbers separately. So 10 would be 49 for the 1, and then 48 for the 0, and so on. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add 1, 3, and we're also going to introduce another int variable called carry, which is going to be the carry of some arithmetic operations. For example, we might have to add 6 and 7, which is going to give us 13. The number like 13, we're going to dissect it. We're going to take the 3 and use it to build our output. And we're going to take the 1 from the 13 and we're going to use it to add the next sequence of numbers, because what we're going to do is after we add two numbers together, we're going to look at the very next number that comes after it for both num1 and num2, and then add those together with the carry from before. Now the carry might be 0 and it might be greater than 0. Now we're going to keep repeating this process in a while loop that follows three conditions. We're going to have two pointers I and j, which are going to be equal to num1.length minus 1 and num2.length minus 1 respectively for I and j. And now obviously I and j, these are our pointers to the numbers that we need to add up. They initially start at the very last number or last character of num1 and num2. And after we perform that process which I spoke about with the carry and the sum, we're going to decrement I and j to look at the next numbers that we need to add up. And the final condition we need to check is if carry is greater than 0, because let's say we run out of numbers to process, but the very last numbers that we added up were 9 and 9, for example. That's going to lead to a sum of 18 with a carry of 1. And so that's another digit we need to account for, which is just 1 plus 0 basically. So I believe I addressed everything. Let's go ahead and begin coding now, and if there's anything I need to talk about, then I'll do so. So the first thing we're going to do is create those variables I spoke about. So int carry, initially it's going to be equal to 0, because when we add the first characters, for example here 1 and 3, there isn't a carry from before. So int carry is going to be equal to 0. Now we're going to create our pointers. Int I is going to be equal to num1.length minus 1, and int j is going to be equal to num2.length minus 1. And finally, I'm going to create a string builder SB, which I didn't talk about, I believe, equals to new string builder. So because they said we need to return a string, obviously I need to store our results of summing numbers together into some variable. So we're going to store them into a string builder called SB. Why are we using a string builder and not a normal string? String builder offers us some extra functions that string doesn't offer us, and we'll see those in a bit. The ones we're going to use specifically for this problem are the .append function and the reverse function. And also, when you're in a loop and you're trying to build a string by adding characters to it, behind the scenes what Java does when you're using just a string and not string builder, that it's actually creating a new string every time you modify that string. So every time you add a character to your string, Java is creating a new string completely and adding your new modifications to it. But when you use string builder, Java doesn't create a new string, but it actually modifies the SB that you've been working on. So string builder is just more efficient basically. And just to throw this out there, the difference between string builder and string is that string builder is a mutable class, whereas string is an immutable class. What that means is what I just explained, that string builder, you can modify it without Java having to create a new string every time. So let's go ahead and begin looping. We're in a while loop. We're going to check the 3 conditions which I spoke about. If I is greater than or equal to 0, or if j is greater than or equal to 0, or carry is strictly greater than 0, because if it was greater than or equal to 0, it's going to loop endlessly. And just in case I didn't speak about it, I and j greater than or equal to 0, that means that nums1 and nums2 still have characters that need to be processed. So if you notice in example 1, by the time we reach this character here, num1 is complete. We've checked all the characters. And that's why we have an OR statement, because we need to keep looping until all these 3 conditions are met. That means we have no more characters or numbers to process. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create 2 int variables, int x and int y. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this piece of code and I'm going to speak aloud, and then I'll explain what this does. But you might understand what we're doing as I speak aloud. So let me go ahead and begin. So int x is going to be equal to, if I is greater than or equal to 0. So check if I is greater than or equal to 0. And if it is, then int x is going to be equal to num1.character at I minus the ASCII value of 0. Otherwise, it's equal to 0. And for y, if j is greater than or equal to 0, then small typo here. So if j is greater than or equal to 0, then int y is going to be equal to character at j minus 0, the ASCII value of 0. Otherwise, assign it a value of 0. So instead of writing a if-else statement, we can do that in one line of code. And how we do that is like this. So check if I is greater than or equal to 0. If that's true, then assign the true condition. So x is equal to num1.character at I minus 0. If it's false, give it a value of 0. If you remember earlier, I said that numbers have their own ASCII values. So a number of like 1 has an ASCII value of 49, 0 has 48. So let's say we have a number here, like, let's say we had a 1. Then if I just assign int x is going to be equal to num1.character at I, then I'm going to get 49. But obviously we need a value of 1. So what I'm doing is I'm subtracting it by a reference value, which is 0, which is 48. So if we had a 1, num1.character at I, if that's 1, then this is gonna return 49. We're gonna subtract 48 from it, the ASCII value of 0. And so now int x is equal to 1. If we had 0, then we're gonna get 48. 48 minus 48 is 0, so x is equal to 0, and we're doing the same thing for int y. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create an int sum, which is equal to carry plus x plus y, and then we need to update our carry value to be equal to sum divided by 10, so the leftmost value of our sum. So if our sum turned out to be 10, then carry is going to be 10 divided by 10, which is 1. If our sum was 12, again, carry is going to be 1, so on and so forth. And to our string builder, we need to actually build it. And the way we do that is by appending. So sb.append. What are we going to append? Sum modulo 10, which is the rightmost digit of our sum. So once again, if sum turned out to be 10, sum modulo 10 is 0. If it was 11, sum modulo 10 is 1, and so on. So now actually we can leave our while loop and we can complete our code. Now, if you notice in the main function, it says we need to return string, and we have a string builder, and unfortunately that's not the same. And something else we need to account for is, if you notice, we're actually building our string from right to left. So we're adding 3 with the 1, that's 4. Our SB is now equal to 4. And now we're adding 2 with this one, which is 3. So now our SB is 4, 3. And then we're adding the 1 with the 0, which is 1. So our SB is now 4, 3, 1, which is actually the reverse of our answer. The answer is actually 1, 3, 4. And we need to account for that. So simply what we're going to do, we're going to create a string s, which is equal to sb.reverse. So that reverses our SB. 4, 3, 1 is now 1, 3, 4. And then we need to convert it to string. And then we just need to return s. So let's submit our code and see if it works. I made a very silly mistake, and that's in our while loop, Since I don't have a I minus minus or a j, since we're not updating I and j, this is gonna loop infinitely. So we need to actually just decrement our I minus minus and j minus minus every time we perform a sum of characters. So basically we need to point to the next number after we add two numbers together. So let's sum it again, and there we go. So that was the add string problem on LeetCode. Please excuse the I minus minus j minus minus error. I hope you found that video helpful, and thanks for watching.